The stagecoach lurched to a bone-rattling halt in front of the dusty general store, and Rebecca Owens pressed her trembling hand against the window glass, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs clean through. Old Tucson, Arizona stretched before her in the May afternoon heat of 1878. Nothing more than a collection of weathered buildings huddled together against the endless desert landscape like frightened children seeking shelter from a storm. She had traveled 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to marry a man whose face she had seen only in a single faded photograph, a man who had promised her safety and a fresh start far from the nightmare she was running from. The bruises on her arms had finally faded to yellow shadows beneath her long sleeves, but the memory of Thomas Whitmore's fists remained vivid as yesterday's sunrise. Her former employer had decided that a young woman working in his household should provide more than just honest labor, and when Rebecca had refused his advances, he had made certain no one else in Philadelphia would hire her. The mail-order bride advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like divine intervention, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Jacob Lawson, cattle rancher, seeking honest wife for partnership and building a life in Arizona territory. No fancy words, no false promises, just straightforward need matching her desperate circumstances. Now, as she stepped down from the stagecoach, her worn leather bag clutched in both hands, Rebecca's eyes scanned the handful of people gathered along the wooden sidewalk. A woman in a faded calico dress shepherded 3 children past the mercantile. 2 older men sat outside the saloon, their chairs tilted back against the wall, watching the new arrival with idle curiosity. A tall figure separated itself from the shadow of the livery stable across the street, and Rebecca's breath caught. Jacob Lawson was bigger than she had imagined, well over 6 feet of sun-bronze muscle and broad shoulders that strained against his work shirt. His hat was pulled low, casting his face in shadow as he crossed the dusty street with long, purposeful strides. Rebecca instinctively took a step backward, her shoulder blades pressing against the stagecoach wheel. Every masculine approach had meant danger for the past 6 months, and her body reacted before her mind could catch up with reason. He stopped about 10 feet away, as though sensing her fear, and slowly removed his hat. His face was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with strong features that looked like they had been carved from the same red rock that dotted the desert landscape. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes were the clear gray of storm clouds over the mountains. Those eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to shrink into herself, but there was no cruelty in them, no calculation. Just honest assessment mixed with what might have been concern. "Miss Owens?" His voice was deep and surprisingly gentle for such a large man. "I'm Jacob Lawson. I hope your journey was not too difficult." Rebecca managed a small nod, her throat too tight for words. She had prepared a dozen things to say during the long journey west, but now they all scattered like tumbleweeds in the wind. Up close, he was even more imposing, his presence filling the space between them with an energy that made her pulse race with something that was not quite fear, but close enough that she could not tell the difference. "I have a wagon here," Jacob said, gesturing toward the livery stable. "The ranch is about 5 miles out. We can stop at the preacher's house first if you would like to get the ceremony done today. Or if you need time to rest and get your bearings, that's fine too. Whatever makes you comfortable." The consideration in his words nearly undid her. Rebecca had expected demands, expectations, perhaps even disappointment when he saw that she was not the fresh-faced beauty that some men sought in a mail-order bride. Instead, he was offering her choices, giving her control when she had been powerless for so long. "Today would be fine," she heard herself say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, if that suits you, Mr. Lawson." Something that might have been relief crossed his features. "Jacob, please, and I will call you Rebecca, if that is all right." She nodded again, and he moved forward to take her bag. Rebecca flinched violently, jerking away so fast that she stumbled over her own skirts. Jacob froze instantly, his hands suspended in midair, his expression shifting from surprise to understanding in the space of a heartbeat. He slowly lowered his arm and took a deliberate step backward. "I apologize," he said quietly. "I should have asked first. May I carry your bag to the wagon?" Rebecca felt heat flood her cheeks, shame mixing with lingering terror. "I am sorry. I did not mean to." "Yes, you may take it. Thank you." But Jacob did not reach for the bag again. Instead, he turned and started walking toward the livery stable, keeping a careful distance between them. "You can carry it yourself if that is easier," he called back over his shoulder. "The wagon is just there, the one with the gray horse and the traces. Take your time." Rebecca stood rooted to the spot for a long moment, her bag still clutched against her chest like armor. The other mail-order brides she had met at the boarding house in Kansas City during a stop had warned her about what to expect. Most had painted grim pictures of hard men who wanted servants and bed warmers, not partners. A few had been more optimistic, but even their stories had not prepared her for this strange gentleness from a man who looked like he could break a person in half without much effort. She forced her feet to move, following Jacob's path across the street. The afternoon sun beat down on her dark traveling dress, and sweat trickled down her spine. Philadelphia had been warm when she left, but this was a different kind of heat entirely, dry and relentless, baking the earth hard as stone. Jacob was checking the harness on the horse when she reached the wagon, his strong hands moving with practiced efficiency. The wagon itself was well maintained, the wood recently oiled, the wheels solid. Everything about it spoke of a man who took care of his possessions and responsibilities. He glanced up as she approached, but did not move toward her. "You can put your bag in the back," he said, nodding toward the wagon bed. "There's a crate there to set it on, so it does not slide around." Rebecca hefted her bag over the side rail, grateful that it was not heavier. Everything she owned in the world fit in that single worn leather case. Jacob waited until she had secured it before gesturing toward the wagon seat. "Would you like help up, or would you prefer to manage on your own?" The question was asked without judgment, just simple practicality, and Rebecca appreciated that more than he could know. "I can manage, thank you." She gathered her skirts and climbed up, settling herself on the sun-warmed wood. Jacob swung up beside her with fluid grace, careful to leave space between them on the bench. He picked up the reins and clicked his tongue, and the gray horse leaned into the traces. They rode in silence through the town, such as it was. Rebecca counted perhaps 20 buildings total, including the saloon, general store, livery stable, a church with a small house beside it, and various other structures whose purposes she could only guess. A few people waved to Jacob as they passed, and he nodded in return, but he did not stop to make introductions. For that, Rebecca was grateful. The thought of meeting strangers, of having to smile and make small talk, while her whole life balanced on the edge of this knife, was more than she could bear. The church was a simple white building, with a cross mounted above the door. Jacob pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the adjacent house and set the brake. He climbed down and started to circle around to Rebecca's side, then stopped himself and simply stood there, waiting. "The preacher's name is Reverend Thomas Marsh," Jacob said, as Rebecca climbed down on her own. "His wife is Mary. They are good people, kind people. They know you are coming, and they will not judge or pry." The reassurance in his voice told Rebecca that Jacob understood more about her situation than she had put in her carefully worded letters. Perhaps her desperation had shown through, despite her attempts to sound merely practical. Or perhaps Jacob Lawson was simply more perceptive than most men. The door opened before they reached it, and a plump woman with kind eyes and graying hair smiled at them from the threshold. "Jacob, right on time as always. And you must be Miss Owens. Come in, come in. I have tea and some cookies if you would like refreshment before the ceremony." The inside of the house was blessedly cool and smelled of fresh bread and lemon oil. Mary Marsh ushered them into a tidy parlor where Reverend Marsh stood waiting. He was a tall, thin man with spectacles and a gentle demeanor that immediately put Rebecca somewhat at ease. "Welcome to Old Tucson, Miss Owens," he said warmly. "I understand you have had a long journey. Would you like a few moments to refresh yourself before we proceed?" "Yes, please," Rebecca said gratefully. Mary showed her to a small room with a basin and pitcher of cool water, and Rebecca took the opportunity to splash her face and neck, attempting to wash away some of the dust and exhaustion. She stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the basin, and hardly recognized the woman looking back at her. Her auburn hair, which she had always kept pinned in a neat bun, had come loose in wisps around her face. Her green eyes looked enormous in her thin face, shadowed with fatigue and lingering fear. She was 22 years old, but right now she felt ancient. When she emerged, she found Jacob standing by the window, hat in hand, staring out at the desert beyond. He turned as she entered, and something in his expression made her heart constrict. He looked almost as nervous as she felt. The ceremony was mercifully brief. Reverend Marsh spoke about partnership and respect, about building a life together through mutual support and understanding. Rebecca wondered if Jacob had requested those particular words, or if the Reverend simply intuited what this particular union needed to hear. When it came time to exchange vows, Rebecca's voice shook but held steady. Jacob's was firm and clear, each word spoken like a promise he intended to keep. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Marsh said with a smile. Jacob looked at Rebecca, his gray eyes searching hers. "May I?" he asked quietly, so only she could hear. The kindness of it, the respect inherent in asking permission even now, when legally she belonged to him, made Rebecca's eyes burn with unshed tears. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Jacob leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and pressed his lips gently to her forehead. It was chaste and brief, but Rebecca felt the warmth of it spread through her chest like honey in tea. When he pulled back, his cheeks were slightly flushed. "Thank you," she whispered. They signed the marriage certificate, Mary and the Reverend serving as witnesses, and then they were back in the wagon, leaving the town behind as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The desert stretched out around them in shades of red and gold, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional towering saguaro cactus. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and gray against the brilliant blue sky. "The ranch is small," Jacob said after they had ridden for a while in comfortable silence. "Just me and about 200 head of cattle. I have a hired hand, Miguel Torres, who helps with the roundups and branding, but mostly it is just me running things. The house is nothing fancy, but it is solid and it keeps out the heat and the cold. I built it myself 3 years ago." Rebecca listened, trying to imagine what her new life would look like. "Do you have neighbors?" "Closest ranch is about 3 miles east, belongs to a family named the Hendersons. Good people, 4 children. There are a few other spreads scattered around, but ranching out here means a lot of solitude. I should have mentioned that in my letters. If you need company and conversation, it might be harder to come by than you are used to." "Solitude sounds perfect right now," Rebecca said honestly. The thought of space, of not being crowded and cornered, of having room to breathe, sounded like heaven. Jacob glanced at her sidelong, and she saw understanding in his eyes again. "I meant what I said in my letters about partnership. I am not looking for a servant or someone to order around. I need help running the ranch, yes, but I also wanted someone to share my life with, someone to talk to in the evenings, someone to make plans with. I have been alone long enough to know I do not like it much." "What brought you out here?" Rebecca asked, genuinely curious. "Your letters mentioned you came from Kansas. My father had a farm there, but after my mother died, he just gave up. Drank himself to death within 2 years. I sold the farm, such as it was, and headed west looking for a fresh start. Ended up in Arizona territory and fell in love with the land despite the harshness of it. Or maybe because of it. Something about the desert makes you feel like you can see forever. Like the horizons are wider here than anywhere else." Rebecca considered that. "I can understand wanting to start over somewhere new. Sometimes a person needs distance from the past." "Yes," Jacob said simply. "Sometimes they do." They crested a low rise, and Jacob pointed ahead. "There it is, home." The ranch house sat in a shallow valley, with a creek running behind it, the water lined with cottonwood trees that provided precious shade. The house itself was built of adobe, with a wooden roof and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. It was indeed small, but it looked sturdy and well kept, with real glass windows and a stone chimney. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and Rebecca could see cattle grazing in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. "The creek runs year-round," Jacob said as they approached. "It is one of the reasons I chose this spot. Water is life out here. I have a good well too, so we do not go wanting. The garden is on the east side of the house, gets morning sun but shade in the afternoon. I have been trying to keep it going, but I am afraid I do not have much of a talent for growing things." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and set the brake. This time he did come around to Rebecca's side, but he stopped a few feet away and held up his hand, palm out and open. "May I help you down? The step is higher than it looks." Rebecca looked at that outstretched hand, calloused and strong, and felt her throat tighten. Her instinct was to refuse, to maintain her independence and her safe distance. But something in Jacob's patient stance, in the way he waited without pressure or expectation, made her reach out slowly and place her much smaller hand in his. The moment her fingers touched his palm, she flinched involuntarily, her whole body tensing in anticipation of pain. But Jacob's hand simply closed gently around hers, warm and solid, his grip firm enough to provide support, but careful not to crush. He helped her down from the wagon with the same care someone might use with something precious and fragile. "I will never hurt you," he said quietly, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I need you to know that, Rebecca. Whatever happened to you before, whatever you were running from, it will not happen here. I swear it on my life." The tears she had been holding back since Philadelphia finally spilled over, tracking hot paths down her dusty cheeks. She stood there with her hand still clasped in his, crying silently while the desert wind whispered around them and the sun painted everything in shades of gold. Jacob did not pull her into his arms or try to shush her tears. He simply stood there, holding her hand, providing an anchor while the storm passed through her. When she finally regained control, he released her hand gently and pulled a surprisingly clean handkerchief from his pocket. "Thank you," Rebecca managed, dabbing at her eyes. "I am sorry for—" "You have nothing to apologize for," Jacob interrupted firmly. "Nothing at all. Now, would you like to see the inside of the house? I am afraid it is not very well organized, and I cannot vouch for my housekeeping skills, but the roof does not leak and the stove works well." He was giving her an out, changing the subject to something practical and manageable, and Rebecca was grateful for it. She nodded and followed him up the steps to the porch. The door was unlocked, and Jacob pushed it open, gesturing for her to enter first. The interior was dim and cool after the bright sunshine. As Rebecca's eyes adjusted, she took in the main room, which served as both kitchen and living area. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rocking chair and a worn but comfortable-looking sofa positioned nearby. The kitchen area held a good-sized cast-iron stove, a table with 4 chairs, and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. Everything was clean, if somewhat haphazardly arranged, and the floor was swept. "There are 2 bedrooms," Jacob said, pointing to doors on opposite sides of the room. "The larger one is there, to the left. It has the better mattress and more space. I will take the smaller room. You can arrange things however you like, change anything that does not suit you. I want you to feel like this is your home, not just my house where you happen to live." Rebecca turned to stare at him. "Separate bedrooms?" Jacob met her gaze steadily. "I told you I wanted a partner, and I meant it. I do not expect— that is, I think we should take time to know each other before we worry about the other aspects of marriage. There is no rush, Rebecca. We have all the time in the world." The relief that flooded through her was so intense it made her dizzy. She had been bracing herself for demands, for the assertion of husbandly rights, for being forced to submit to intimacies that terrified her. Instead, this big, capable man was offering her time and space and the freedom to heal. "Why are you being so kind to me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "You do not know me. I could be a terrible wife. I could be lazy or mean or any number of awful things." Jacob smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and more approachable. "I am a pretty good judge of character, and your letters told me a lot about who you are. You are educated and thoughtful. You ask questions about the ranch and the work, not about money or status. You were honest about not having prospects in Philadelphia without giving me details that clearly pained you to think about. And just now, you asked me why I am being kind instead of just accepting it as your due. That tells me you are used to cruelty, which means you have probably never been cruel yourself. Mean people expect meanness. Kind people are surprised by kindness because they give it away without expecting it back." Rebecca stared at this man she had married less than 2 hours ago, this stranger who somehow seemed to see straight through to her battered soul. "I will try to be a good wife to you," she said earnestly. "I will work hard and learn whatever you need me to learn. I am a decent cook and a good hand with a needle. I know how to keep accounts and manage a household budget. I will earn my place here." "You already have a place here," Jacob said gently. "You are my wife. That is enough. Everything else we will figure out together. Now, I am sure you are exhausted and hungry. Why do not you rest for a bit while I bring in your bag and start dinner? I am not a fancy cook, but I can manage beef stew that will not poison us." "I can help with dinner," Rebecca protested. "You have been working all day and then had to come into town for me. You must be tired too." "I am used to the work. You are tired from traveling. We can share the cooking starting tomorrow, but tonight, let me take care of it. Consider it a wedding present." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and Rebecca felt a small flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. She found herself smiling back, just a little. All right, but only for tonight. Her new bedroom was larger than the room she had rented in Philadelphia, with a real bed frame holding a cornhusk mattress that looked relatively new. A dresser stood against one wall, and pegs near the door provided space for hanging clothes. A window looked out toward the mountains, and the evening light streaming through it painted everything in warm amber tones. Someone, presumably Jacob, had placed a vase of wildflowers on the dresser. The gesture was so unexpectedly sweet that Rebecca felt her eyes burn again. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 spare dresses on the pegs, and arranging her underthings in the dresser drawers. Her mother's Bible, the only possession she had left from her family, she placed carefully on the small table beside the bed. Then she lay down, intending to rest for just a few minutes, and fell into the first deep, dreamless sleep she had experienced in months. When she woke, the room was dim with twilight, and she could smell something savory cooking. Rebecca sat up quickly, disoriented for a moment before memory rushed back. Arizona. The ranch. Jacob. She was married. She was safe. She splashed water on her face from the basin and pitcher that had appeared on the dresser while she slept, then braided her hair into a neat plait down her back. Her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser looked more rested, some of the haunted shadows lifted from her eyes. Jacob looked up from the stove when she emerged. Good timing. Stew is just about done. I hope you are hungry. The table was already set with mismatched but clean plates and utensils. Jacob ladled generous portions of beef stew into bowls, added some cornbread that smelled like heaven, and carried everything to the table. He held Rebecca's chair for her, but did not try to touch her as she sat down. The stew was actually quite good, rich with beef and vegetables, and seasoned better than Rebecca had expected from a bachelor cowboy. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Jacob started asking her questions about her journey west, carefully avoiding anything too personal about her life before. Rebecca found herself relaxing, talking about the changing landscape as the train had carried her across the country, about the other travelers she had met, about her first glimpse of the desert and how alien and beautiful it had seemed. "Did you ever live anywhere else besides Philadelphia?" Jacob asked, soaking up the last of his stew with a piece of cornbread. "We lived in Boston when I was very young, before my father died. I barely remember it. After he passed, my mother moved us to Philadelphia to be near her sister. But then my mother died when I was 16, and my aunt followed 2 years later. That is when I went into service with the Whitmore family." She stopped abruptly, not wanting to continue down that path, but Jacob just nodded and shifted the conversation. "What did you do for fun? When you had free time, I mean." "I loved to read whenever I could find books, and I enjoyed walking, exploring the city. There was a small library near the Whitmore house, and the librarian was kind enough to let me borrow books even though I was just a servant. I read everything I could get my hands on." Jacob's face lit up. "There are not many books out here, but I have a few, and maybe we can order more from the catalogs. Do you like poetry? I have a volume of Whitman that I have read so many times the pages are falling out." They talked about books and poetry until full darkness fell outside, and the oil lamp on the table created a small circle of warm light in the big room. Rebecca could not remember the last time she had simply talked with someone, sharing thoughts and ideas without fear of saying the wrong thing or sparking anger. Jacob was educated, she realized, more than she had expected. He spoke thoughtfully about things he had read, asked her opinions, and actually listened to her answers. "I should probably check on the stock before bed," Jacob said eventually, pushing back from the table. "Make yourself at home. There is more hot water on the stove if you want to wash up, and help yourself to anything you need. You're home now, remember?" After he went out, Rebecca cleaned up the dinner dishes, finding a strange pleasure in the simple domestic task. Through the window, she could see the glow of a lantern moving toward the barn as Jacob made his rounds. The night was full of unfamiliar sounds, insects chirping, the distant call of some night bird, the soft lowing of cattle. But none of it felt threatening. Instead, it felt like the world settling into peaceful sleep. When Jacob returned, she was sitting in the rocking chair near the fireplace, her mother's Bible open on her lap, though she was not really reading it. He stopped just inside the door, not wanting to intrude on her space. "I am usually up with the sun," he said, "but you sleep as late as you need tomorrow. Take time to settle in and get your bearings. No rush on anything. Thank you, Jacob, for everything today, for being patient and kind, for giving me a chance when I had nowhere else to go. We are giving each other a chance, he corrected gently. Partnership, remember? Good night, Rebecca. Good night. She listened to him move around in his small bedroom, heard the creak of his bed frame as he settled in for the night. The house felt different with another person in it, lived in and less lonely. Rebecca carried her Bible back to her room and changed into her nightgown, then slipped between the sheets of her new bed. The mattress was comfortable, the pillow soft, and through the window she could see stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Rebecca fell asleep feeling something that might almost be hope. The next weeks passed in a rhythm that gradually became familiar. Rebecca woke early, usually to find Jacob already up, and moving around quietly so as not to disturb her. They shared breakfast together, simple meals of eggs and bacon or oatmeal with dried fruit. Then Jacob would head out to work the ranch while Rebecca tackled the domestic chores. She threw herself into making the house a real home. She organized the kitchen properly, scrubbed every surface until it shone, and sewed curtains for the windows from fabric she found in a trunk in the barn. The garden became her special project. It had been neglected, the plants struggling in the harsh soil, but Rebecca had learned a few things about gardening from her mother. She weeded and watered, amended the soil with compost from the barn, and coaxed the surviving plants back to health. She even started some new vegetables from seeds she found in the pantry. Jacob watched her transformation of his bachelor homestead with obvious pleasure. He praised her cooking, admired the curtains, and seemed genuinely delighted when she served fresh greens from the garden with dinner one evening. He was unfailingly respectful of her space, never entering her bedroom without permission, always asking before he touched her, even in the most casual ways. But despite his care and consideration, Rebecca found herself struggling. Some days the desert felt too big, too empty, the silence pressing down on her like a physical weight. She would be washing dishes or sweeping the floor, and suddenly Thomas Whitmore's face would flash in her memory, his voice echoing in her ears, and she would have to stop and breathe through the panic. Other times, Jacob would move too quickly or come around a corner unexpectedly, and she would flinch away before she could control the response. Each time it happened, she saw the hurt flash across his face before he carefully schooled his expression and gave her space. It came to a head about 3 weeks after her arrival. Jacob had been out mending fences all day, hot and exhausting work in the June sun. He came in for dinner, dusty and tired, and found Rebecca standing at the stove, staring blankly at a pot of beans that had boiled almost dry, tears streaming silently down her face. "Rebecca?" His voice was gentle but concerned. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" She shook her head mutely, unable to find words to explain the crushing weight of memory and fear that had descended on her that afternoon. Jacob moved to take the pot off the heat, and his arm brushed against hers. Rebecca jerked away so violently that she stumbled backward into the table. "I am sorry," she gasped. "I am sorry. I know you were not going to hurt me. I know that, but I cannot seem to make my body understand. You must think I am insane or broken or—" "Stop." Jacob's command was firm but not harsh. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table, deliberately making himself smaller, less threatening. "Sit down, please. We need to talk about this." Rebecca sank into the chair across from him, wrapping her arms around herself. Jacob waited patiently until she lifted her eyes to meet his. "You are not broken," he said clearly. "You are hurt. There is a difference. Something bad happened to you, bad enough to send you running clear across the country to marry a stranger. You do not have to tell me the details if you do not want to, but I think it might help if we talk about it. Secrets fester like infected wounds. Sometimes you have to lance them and let the poison out." Rebecca drew a shaky breath. "My employer in Philadelphia, Thomas Whitmore. He was a respected man, wealthy, married with 3 children. I worked in his household for almost 4 years, with no problems. But then his wife went to stay with her mother in New York for a month, and he started looking at me differently. He started finding excuses to be alone with me, saying things that made me uncomfortable, and then one day, he cornered me in the pantry and tried to force himself on me. The words came out in a rush, like poison being drained from a wound, just as Jacob had said. I fought him off. I scratched his face badly, and I think I might have cracked one of his ribs with my knee. He was furious. He threw me out of the house without a reference, without paying me the wages I was owed. And he told everyone in Philadelphia society that I had stolen from him, that I was a liar and a thief. No one would hire me after that. His word against mine, and he was powerful while I was nothing. He attacked me 2 more times after that, Rebecca continued, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. Once when I was leaving an interview at another house, he followed me into an alley, and once he came to the boarding house where I was staying and bribed the landlady to let him into my room. That time was the worst. He beat me because I had embarrassed him, because I had dared to fight back. He said he would make sure I starved in the streets, that he would ruin any chance I had of making a living. That is when I saw the advertisement for mail-order brides. It was my only way out. Jacob's hands were clenched into fists on the table, his knuckles white, but his voice remained steady. Where is Thomas Whitmore now? Still in Philadelphia, as far as I know, living his comfortable life with his wife and children, probably terrorizing some other poor girl he has power over. He should be horsewhipped, Jacob said flatly, and then thrown in prison. But I understand why you could not make that happen. The law is rarely on the side of women in situations like that, especially when powerful men are involved. He took a deep breath, visibly forcing himself to calm down. Thank you for telling me. I know that could not have been easy. You must wish you had chosen a different bride, Rebecca said miserably. Someone who would not flinch every time you come near. Someone who could be a proper wife to you. Look at me. Jacob waited until she raised her eyes to his. I married you, not some imaginary perfect woman, but you, Rebecca Owens, who is now Rebecca Lawson. You are exactly the wife I want. We just need time, that is all. Time for you to learn that not all men are like Thomas Whitmore. Time for your body to understand what your mind already knows, that you are safe here. How can you be so patient? Rebecca asked. Most men would have lost their tempers by now, would have demanded their rights as a husband. Then most men are fools, Jacob said simply. I want a wife who wants to be with me, not one who endures me out of duty or fear. That is worth waiting for, worth working toward. And in the meantime, we are building a friendship, are we not? I like talking with you in the evenings. I like seeing what you have done with the house and the garden. I like having someone to share my days with. That is more than I had before you came. Rebecca felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of tension she had been carrying for so long, she had forgotten it was there. I like those things too, very much. Then we keep going, Jacob said. One day at a time. Some days will be better than others, and that is all right. But I need you to promise me something. What? If you are having a hard day, if the memories are too much, tell me. Do not try to tough it out alone. Let me help, even if that just means giving you space or sitting quietly while you work through it. We are partners, remember? Partners support each other. I promise, Rebecca said. And Jacob, thank you for not being angry with me. I am angry, he admitted, but not at you. At Whitmore, at the society that enabled him, at the circumstances that put you in that position in the first place. But never at you, Rebecca. Never at you. They sat together in the lamplight while the evening stretched around them, and Rebecca felt something shift in her perception of this man she had married. He was not just kind and patient. He was strong in ways that had nothing to do with physical power. He was the kind of man who kept his promises, who honored his commitments even when they were harder than he had expected. The summer deepened, and with it, Rebecca's connection to the ranch and to Jacob grew stronger. She met the neighbors, including Margaret Henderson, who became a fast friend despite the distance between their ranches. Margaret was a cheerful woman in her 30s, with 4 rambunctious children and a laugh that could be heard across the valley. She welcomed Rebecca warmly and seemed to sense without being told that the new bride needed gentleness and patience. Jacob is a good man, Margaret told Rebecca one afternoon when she had ridden over with fresh bread and gossip. My husband Samuel says he is the most honest rancher in the territory. Never tries to move his property lines or water his cattle from his neighbor's creeks. He will be a good husband to you once you get to know him. He already is, Rebecca said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. It was true, she realized. Jacob had been nothing but good to her from the moment she arrived. Miguel Torres, Jacob's hired hand, turned out to be a wiry man in his 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes. He tipped his hat respectfully to Rebecca when Jacob introduced them and seemed pleased that the boss had found himself a wife. Miguel lived in a small cabin on the far side of the property with his own wife Rosa, who came to visit Rebecca a few times and taught her how to make proper tortillas. "You need to feed that man of yours well," Rosa said with a wink. "He works too hard, that one, always pushing himself. He needs someone to make sure he eats proper and does not wear himself down to nothing." Rebecca found herself taking pride in caring for Jacob. She made sure he had hearty breakfasts before long days of work, packed him lunches to take out to the range, and prepared satisfying dinners in the evening. She mended his clothes when they tore, made sure his shirts were clean and pressed, and worried when he came home with cuts or bruises from the rough work of ranching. And slowly, almost without her noticing, the flinching stopped. Jacob's presence became comforting instead of threatening. His voice saying her name became something that made her smile instead of tense. She found herself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit together, talking about their days, making plans for the ranch, reading aloud from their limited collection of books. One evening in late July, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible shades of orange and purple. Jacob was whittling a piece of wood, his hands moving with unconscious skill, while Rebecca was attempting to fix a torn seam on one of his work shirts. "Rebecca," Jacob's voice was tentative. "May I ask you something?" "Of course. Would it be all right if I sat closer to you? I do not mean anything improper. I just—" He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "I miss being close to people. It has been a long time since I had anyone to share a simple affection with, but only if you are comfortable with it." Rebecca set down her mending and looked at him. Really looked at him. Somewhere over the past 2 months, he had stopped being a stranger, stopped being a source of potential danger. He had become Jacob, her husband, her partner, her friend. And she realized with a start that she missed physical closeness too. She had been touch-starved for so long, first in the Whitmore household where any contact was either clinical or threatening, and then in the careful distance she and Jacob had maintained. "Yes," she said. "I think I would like that." Jacob moved his chair closer, near enough that their arms were almost touching. He went back to his whittling, making no other move, giving her time to adjust. Rebecca picked up her mending again, acutely aware of his presence, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the simple companionship of sharing space without fear. After a few minutes, she let her shoulder rest against his arm. Jacob went still for a moment, then continued his whittling, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. They sat that way until the stars came out, not talking, just being together. That night marked a turning point. Rebecca found herself seeking out small touches, standing close to Jacob in the kitchen, letting their hands brush when they passed dishes at the table, sitting beside him rather than across from him during meals. Each contact reinforced the lesson that his touch meant safety, not danger. August brought brutal heat that made working outside during the middle of the day nearly impossible. Jacob shifted his schedule, working early morning and late evening, resting during the worst of the afternoon heat. Rebecca did the same, waking before dawn to do the heavy chores before the sun turned the world into an oven. One particularly hot afternoon, they were both inside seeking refuge from the heat. Jacob was catching up on his account books at the kitchen table, while Rebecca worked on a quilt she had started, piecing together scraps of fabric into a pattern. The heat made thinking difficult, and eventually Rebecca set aside her work and went to dampen a cloth in the water basin. "Here," she said, approaching Jacob. "This will help cool you down." She reached out to press the cool cloth to the back of his neck, a gesture she had seen Rosa do for Miguel. But as her hand came near him, Jacob turned his head at the same moment, and her fingers accidentally brushed against his face. And she did not flinch, did not pull away. Just let her hand rest there for a moment, feeling the slight scratch of his afternoon stubble, the warmth of his skin, the realness of him. Jacob's eyes met hers, and something electric passed between them. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat, he reached up and covered her hand with his, pressing it more firmly against his cheek. "Rebecca," he said softly, "do you have any idea how much you have come to mean to me?" Her heart was pounding, but not with fear. This was something else entirely, something new and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I think I might," she whispered, "because you have come to mean everything to me, Jacob Lawson." He stood slowly, not releasing her hand, and then carefully, so carefully, he placed his other hand on her waist. "May I kiss you?" "Properly, I mean." not just on the forehead, like at our wedding. Rebecca's answer was to rise on her toes and close the distance between them herself. Their lips met tentatively at first, a soft exploration that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Jacob's arms came around her, holding her gently but securely, and Rebecca melted into him, her hands sliding up to rest on his chest, where she could feel his heart hammering as fast as her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have been falling in love with you since the day you arrived. Maybe even before that, reading your letters and imagining what you would be like." "I love you too," Rebecca replied, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. Somewhere between that first terrified flinch and this moment, she had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with her cowboy husband. "I was so scared when I came here, scared that I would never be able to feel this way, that I was too broken to ever trust anyone again. But you showed me I was wrong. You showed me what real love looks like." They stood wrapped in each other's arms while the afternoon heat pressed down outside and the future stretched before them, suddenly full of promise. That evening, after dinner and the evening chores, Rebecca took Jacob's hand and led him to her bedroom. She was nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she unbuttoned her dress. But when Jacob pulled her close and kissed her again, the fear evaporated like morning dew under the desert sun. He was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable every step of the way. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, it was nothing like the violence and force she had feared. It was tender and sweet and absolutely right. Two people joining together, not out of obligation or power, but out of genuine love and desire. Afterward, lying in Jacob's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Rebecca felt like she had finally come home. Not to the house or the ranch or even Arizona, but to this person who had taken her broken pieces and helped her put them back together. "No more separate bedrooms," Jacob murmured into her hair. "Unless you want them, of course." Rebecca laughed, the sound bubbling up from a place of pure happiness. "No more separate bedrooms," she agreed. The seasons turned and their love deepened. Fall brought cooler temperatures and the hard work of preparing for winter. Rebecca helped with the cattle drives when Miguel needed extra hands, learning to ride and rope under Jacob's patient instruction. She proved to have a natural talent for working with animals, and Jacob joked that she would put him and Miguel out of business if she kept improving. Winter came, cold nights and occasional snow that turned the desert into a strange wonderland of white against red rock. They spent the long evenings curled together near the fireplace, planning for the spring and the future. Rebecca wanted to expand the garden, maybe add some chickens for eggs and meat. Jacob talked about increasing the herd if the spring calving went well. And in the privacy of their shared bedroom, they continued to learn each other's bodies and hearts, building an intimacy that went far beyond the physical. Rebecca bloomed under Jacob's love, her confidence growing, the haunted look finally fading completely from her eyes. She no longer started at unexpected sounds or woke in the night from bad dreams. She felt safe in a way she had never experienced before. Spring of 1879 brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. The cows dropped healthy calves, the garden burst into green abundance, and Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. She told Jacob one evening in April, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, wonder, and finally pure joy. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a child on Christmas morning. "We are going to be parents," he said in amazement. "Rebecca, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction had already answered the question. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Jacob said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach with reverence. "Though I will admit I am also terrified. I do not know anything about babies." "We will learn together," Rebecca assured him, "just like we have learned everything else." Margaret Henderson was thrilled when she heard the news and became Rebecca's main source of information and support. She shared all the wisdom she had gained from 4 pregnancies and assured Rebecca that she would be there to help when the time came. Rosa brought herbs and teas that were supposed to help with morning sickness and gave Rebecca advice about staying strong during pregnancy. Jacob became almost comically protective, insisting that Rebecca not lift anything heavy or work too hard. She humored him for the most part, though she refused to become an invalid. The pregnancy progressed normally, and by midsummer, Rebecca's belly had swelled noticeably. She felt the first flutters of movement in June and cried when the baby kicked hard enough for Jacob to feel it through her skin. "That is our child," he said in wonder, his hand spread across her belly. "Our son or daughter, growing strong in there." "I hope the baby has your eyes," Rebecca said, "that beautiful gray color, like storm clouds." "I hope they have your spirit," Jacob countered, "your courage and your kindness." The baby came in late October, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the next day. Margaret and Rosa were there, guiding Rebecca through the process while Jacob paced anxiously outside. When the baby's first cries finally rang out, Jacob burst through the door, his face wild with worry. "A son," Margaret announced with a tired smile. "A healthy, strong boy. Congratulations, Jacob." Rebecca lay exhausted against the pillows, holding their newborn son, marveling at his tiny, perfect features. Jacob approached slowly, tears streaming unashamedly down his face, and sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "He is perfect," Jacob breathed, reaching out to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. "Rebecca, you are amazing. Look what you did. Look what we made together." "What should we name him?" Rebecca asked, watching their son yawn, revealing pink gums and a tiny tongue. "I have been thinking about that," Jacob admitted. "What about James? It was my grandfather's name. He was a good man, one of the few people who was ever kind to me when I was growing up." "James Lawson," Rebecca tested the name. "I like it. James it is." Little James proved to be a fairly easy baby, sleeping well and nursing enthusiastically. Jacob was completely besotted with his son, getting up for the middle of the night feedings to change the baby and bring him to Rebecca, then sitting with them both, just watching James nurse with an expression of wonder on his face. "I never thought I would have this," Jacob confessed one night, his voice quiet in the darkness. "A wife I love, a child, a real family. I thought I would just work the ranch alone until I got too old, and then I would sell it and live out my days in town somewhere. But you changed everything, Rebecca. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, something to pass down to our son." "We built it together," Rebecca corrected gently, "and we will keep building it together. This is just the beginning, Jacob." The years that followed proved her right. James grew from a tiny infant into a sturdy toddler with his father's gray eyes and his mother's auburn hair. When he was 2, Rebecca gave birth to a daughter they named Rose after Jacob's mother. Rose was a placid, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world with wide, curious eyes. The ranch prospered as well. Jacob and Miguel expanded the herd, added more grazing land, and built a reputation for quality cattle. Rebecca's garden became legendary in the area, producing abundant vegetables even in the harsh desert climate. She started selling her surplus at the general store in town, earning money that went into the ranch coffers and helped them weather the lean years when drought or disease struck the cattle. By 1885, when Rebecca was 30 and Jacob was 32, they had added a third child to their family, another son they named Matthew. Their house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, and the ranch employed 3 hired hands in addition to Miguel, who was now more of a partner than an employee. One evening in late summer, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Jacob and Rebecca sat together on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. Rebecca was nestled against Jacob's side, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked quietly. "Coming out here, marrying a stranger, building this life so far from everything you knew?" Rebecca sat up so she could look him in the eye. "Jacob Lawson, I have never regretted a single moment of our life together. Well, maybe I regretted the moment when 2-year-old James decided to help make breakfast by breaking every egg we had onto the floor. But that was more frustration than actual regret." Jacob laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "He was just trying to be helpful." "He was trying to feed the eggs to the dog," Rebecca corrected, but she was smiling. She reached up to cup Jacob's face in her hand, feeling the scratch of his beard, the warmth of his skin, all the beloved familiar details that meant home to her now. "You saved my life, Jacob, not just from the physical danger I was in, but from the spiritual death I was sinking into. You showed me what love really means. You gave me safety and trust and a family and a life more wonderful than anything I could have imagined back in Philadelphia." "You saved me too," Jacob said softly. I was so lonely before you came. I did not even realize how much until you arrived and filled all the empty spaces I did not know were there. You made this house a home. You gave me children to raise and love. You partnered with me to build something real and lasting. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I loved you even then." They kissed as the desert sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, the same way they had kissed 1,000 times before and would kiss 1,000 times again. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully. Around them, the ranch they had built together hummed with life and purpose. And in the distance, the mountains stood eternal against the evening sky, silent witnesses to the love story that had unfolded in their shadow. Rebecca thought back to that terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 7 years ago, her hand clutching a worn leather bag, her heart pounding with fear and desperate hope. She thought about the moment Jacob had reached for her hand and she had flinched away, certain that all men meant pain. She thought about his quiet promise, "I will never hurt you." He had kept that promise every single day since, and in keeping it, he had healed wounds that went far deeper than the physical bruises that had long since faded. He had taught her that love did not have to mean fear, that strength could be gentle, that a real man measured his worth not in domination, but in partnership and protection. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked, sensing her reflective mood. "Just about how far we have come," Rebecca said. "How much has changed since that first day? Do you remember when I flinched away from you in front of the stagecoach?" "I remember everything about that day," Jacob said. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, coming all this way alone, starting over with nothing but hope and determination. And I remember promising myself that I would spend the rest of my life proving that you had made the right choice in coming here." "You have proven it every single day," Rebecca assured him, "in 1,000 small ways and a few very large ones. You are the best man I have ever known, Jacob Lawson, and I thank God every day that I saw your advertisement in that newspaper." "I thank him for sending me you," Jacob replied, "for giving me this life, this family, this love. I could not have asked for more." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, scattered across the vast desert sky like promises of all the tomorrows yet to come. The air cooled with the desert night, and eventually they went inside, checking on each sleeping child before retiring to their own room. As Rebecca drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, safe and loved and home, she thought about the young woman she had been and the woman she had become. The journey from Philadelphia to Arizona had been about more than miles traveled. It had been a journey from fear to trust, from brokenness to wholeness, from surviving to truly living. And it had all started with a cowboy who had the wisdom to understand that real strength meant restraint, that true love required patience, and that the most powerful words a man could say to a frightened woman were simply, "I will never hurt you." Jacob had spoken those words and then spent years proving them true. And in doing so, he had given Rebecca the greatest gift imaginable, the freedom to love without fear, to trust without reservation, to build a life without looking over her shoulder for danger. The future stretched ahead of them, full of the everyday challenges and joys of ranch life, and raising children in the harsh beauty of Arizona territory. There would be hard times and good times, struggles and triumphs, sorrows and celebrations. But they would face it all together, partners in every sense of the word, bound by a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger for it. Years continued to pass in the peaceful rhythm of ranch life. The children grew tall and strong under the Arizona sun. James developed his father's skill with cattle and his mother's head for business, often riding out with Jacob to check the herds and help with the endless work of ranching. Rose inherited her mother's talent for making things grow, taking over more and more of the garden as she got older. And young Matthew showed promise of being the horseman in the family, able to gentle even the most skittish animals with patience and intuition. In 1890, when the children were old enough to handle more responsibility, Jacob and Rebecca took a trip to Philadelphia. It had been 12 years since Rebecca had fled, and she found herself curious about what had become of the city and the people she had left behind. They stayed in a modest hotel, so different from the grand houses where Rebecca had once worked, and walked the streets she remembered. On their third day there, Rebecca stood across the street from the Whitmore mansion, staring at the imposing brownstone that had once represented the site of her worst nightmares. Jacob stood beside her, his hand warm and solid in hers. "Do you want to confront him?" Jacob asked quietly. "I will support you whatever you decide." Rebecca watched as Thomas Whitmore himself emerged from the house, older now, grayer, but still carrying himself with the same arrogant confidence. She waited for the fear to rise, for the old terror to grip her, but all she felt was a distant sort of pity. He looked smaller somehow than she remembered, diminished. Just a petty tyrant whose power had only ever extended as far as others allowed. "No," she said finally. "He does not deserve my time or energy. He is nothing to me now, less than nothing. I have a life full of love and purpose, and he is just a bitter memory that gets fainter every year. Confronting him would not change the past, and I have no need for revenge. The best revenge is living well, and I have certainly done that." They turned away from the Whitmore house and walked back toward their hotel. "I am proud of you," Jacob said. "That took real strength." "You taught me that strength," Rebecca replied. "You showed me that I was not what he tried to make me believe I was. You gave me back myself, Jacob." On the train back to Arizona, watching the landscape change from green forests to golden plains to red desert, Rebecca felt a chapter of her life finally close completely. She had faced her past and found it powerless to hurt her. The frightened, desperate woman who had fled Philadelphia was gone, replaced by someone confident and content, someone who knew her own worth. When they returned to the ranch, the children ran to greet them, and Rebecca scooped up Matthew, who at 5 was getting almost too big to lift, while Rose and James competed to tell them everything that had happened while they were gone. Miguel and his family had kept things running smoothly, and the house was just as they had left it, perhaps a bit dustier, but fundamentally unchanged. That night, lying in bed with the familiar sounds of the Arizona night filtering through the window, Rebecca reflected on the fullness of her life. 3 healthy, happy children, a thriving ranch, good friends and neighbors, and most importantly, a husband who had proven day after day, year after year, that love could be gentle and kind, that strength did not require violence, that partnership meant lifting each other up rather than tearing each other down. "Welcome home," Jacob murmured, kissing her temple. "I am home," Rebecca agreed. "I have been home since the day I arrived here, and you promised never to hurt me. You kept that promise, Jacob. You kept every promise you ever made to me." The ranch continued to grow and prosper through the 1890s. They added sheep to their cattle operation, diversifying in a way that helped them weather market fluctuations. Rose took charge of the sheep, managing the small flock with the same care she gave her garden. James worked alongside his father with the cattle, learning every aspect of the business, and Matthew proved himself invaluable as the ranch acquired more horses for breeding and sale. In 1895, Jacob and Rebecca celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary. They had dinner at the house with all 3 children, now teenagers and young adults, and afterward, Jacob took Rebecca's hand and led her out to the porch where their life together had truly begun that night so many years ago when she had let him sit close to her for the first time. 17 years, Jacob said, his arm around her waist. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you stepped off that stagecoach, and sometimes it feels like you have been part of my life forever." "Both things are true," Rebecca said wisely. "The years have gone quickly, but we have packed them so full of life and love that they hold more than most people experience in a lifetime." "I want to give you something," Jacob said. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a delicate gold locket. "Open it." Inside the locket were 2 tiny photographs, one of Rebecca and one of Jacob, taken a few years earlier when a traveling photographer had passed through Old Tucson. Opposite the photos was an inscription, "I will never hurt you. All my love, Jacob." Tears filled Rebecca's eyes as she looked at the locket, at the promise that had defined their entire marriage. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Help me put it on?" Jacob fastened the chain around her neck, and Rebecca touched the locket where it rested just above her heart. "I will never take it off," she promised. They stood together watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. The desert had not changed much in 17 years, still harsh and beautiful, still demanding respect and resilience from those who chose to make their home there. But the ranch had changed, growing from a small operation into a significant enterprise. The house had changed, expanding to accommodate their family. And they had changed, growing from strangers bound by legal contract into partners bound by love and shared history. James married in 1898, bringing his wife Sarah to live on the ranch in a house Jacob and Rebecca had built for them on the eastern edge of the property. In 1899, they made Jacob and Rebecca grandparents for the first time with a daughter named Emma. Holding her granddaughter, watching James with his family, Rebecca marveled at how life had come full circle. She had arrived in Arizona with nothing but fear and hope, and now she had built a legacy that would extend into future generations. Rose married in 1901, though unlike her brother, she and her husband moved to California, where he had family land. Rebecca cried when Rose left, but they promised to write often and visit when they could. Matthew showed no signs of settling down, happy to work the ranch and break horses, claiming he was not ready for the responsibilities of marriage yet. The new century brought changes to Arizona territory. Talk of statehood intensified. The railroad expanded, connecting even remote areas like Old Tucson to the wider world. Modern conveniences slowly made their way to the ranch. A newer, better stove for the kitchen, a windmill to pump water more efficiently, even talk of eventually getting electric lights. Through it all, Jacob and Rebecca remained the solid center around which everything else revolved. They still worked together every day, still sat on the porch together in the evenings, still shared the deep intimacy of people who had built a life together through love and labor. The passion of their early years had matured into something deeper and more lasting, a bone-deep knowledge of each other that required no words. In 1903, 25 years after Rebecca had arrived in Old Tucson, they renewed their wedding vows in a ceremony at the church, with all their family and friends present. Rebecca wore a new dress, but she also wore the locket Jacob had given her years before, and she carried wildflowers from her garden, just as she had imagined doing on her wedding day, though she had been too anxious at the time to think of such details. "I, Jacob Lawson, take you, Rebecca Lawson, to be my wife," Jacob said, his voice still strong, though his hair was now more silver than dark. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. And I renew my promise to you that I will never hurt you, that I will always be your safe harbor and your partner in all things." Rebecca recited her own vows through tears of joy, promising to love and honor the man who had changed her life in every possible way. When Reverend Marsh, now elderly but still presiding over the small church, pronounced them still husband and wife, Jacob kissed her with all the love and tenderness he had shown her for 25 years. The celebration afterward was everything Rebecca had never had the first time they married: music and dancing, abundant food, laughter and joy. She danced with Jacob, with her son James, with Miguel, who was now in his 80s but still spry enough to twirl her around the floor. She held her granddaughter Emma and her new grandson Thomas, James and Sarah's second child. She laughed with Margaret Henderson, her friend of 25 years, and swapped stories with Rosa and other neighbor women who had become like family. As the sun set on the celebration and guests began to depart, Rebecca stood with Jacob watching the desert turn gold and purple in the fading light. "Thank you," she said softly, "for all of this, for every single day of the past 25 years. "Thank you for saying yes to a stranger's advertisement," Jacob replied, "for being brave enough to start over, for giving me a chance to prove myself, for building this life with me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Rebecca. Then, now, and always." They went inside as the stars emerged, their hands clasped together the way they had been clasped countless times before. The house was quiet now, with most of the children grown and gone, but it did not feel empty. It felt full of memories and love, every room holding stories of their life together. Years continued to pass, bringing the changes and challenges that all lives must face. Miguel died peacefully in his sleep in 1905, and they buried him on the ranch he had helped build, with Rosa and all their extended family gathered to mourn. Rosa followed him 2 years later, and Rebecca grieved for the woman who had been her friend and teacher. Matthew finally married in 1908, settling down with a woman he met in Tucson named Catherine, who shared his love of horses. They built a house on the western edge of the ranch property and started a formal horse breeding program that quickly gained an excellent reputation. Rose and her husband visited from California in 1910, bringing their 3 children to meet their grandparents and see the ranch. Rebecca delighted in showing her daughter around, seeing the pride in Rose's eyes as she took in everything her parents had built. James and Sarah added 3 more children to their family, filling the ranch with the next generation. Jacob taught his grandchildren to ride and rope, passing down the skills and knowledge he had accumulated over a lifetime of ranching. Rebecca taught them to garden and cook, to read and write, to think for themselves and stand up for what was right. In 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood, and Jacob and Rebecca celebrated along with the rest of the territory, now officially the state of Arizona. They had lived through massive changes, from the wild, rough and tumble days of the territory to the more settled, civilized era of statehood. Through it all, their ranch had endured and prospered, a testament to hard work and partnership. By 1915, Jacob and Rebecca were in their late 50s and early 60s, still active and involved in the ranch, but gradually turning over more responsibility to James and Matthew. They had earned their rest, but neither was quite ready to step back completely. The ranch was in their blood, part of who they were. One evening in late spring, they sat on the porch as they had done for nearly 40 years, watching the sunset paint the familiar desert landscape in shades of fire and gold. Rebecca rested her head on Jacob's shoulder, comfortable in the silence between them. No need for words after so many years of partnership. "Do you remember the first time we sat here together like this?" Jacob asked. "You were so skittish, like a wild horse that needed gentling." "I remember," Rebecca said. "I was terrified of you, of all men, of everything really. But you were so patient with me, so kind. You never pushed, never demanded. You just waited until I was ready." "Best decision I ever made," Jacob said. "Waiting for you, giving you time and space. Some things are worth being patient for." "You gave me my life back," Rebecca said seriously. "I was barely surviving when I came here, just going through the motions. But you showed me how to truly live again, how to trust and love and build something meaningful. Everything good in my life came from that first moment when you promised never to hurt me and then kept that promise. You gave me just as much," Jacob insisted. "You took a lonely cowboy and made him a husband and father and grandfather. You turned a house into a home. You built a legacy worth leaving behind. I was existing before you came, but I was not really living either." They sat in peaceful silence as the stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had witnessed every moment of their life together. The same moon that had shone on their wedding night now illuminated their silver hair and lined faces, marks of a life well lived. Inside the house, the clock chimed 9 times. Soon they would go inside, check the locks, bank the fire, and retire to the bedroom they had shared for nearly 4 decades. They would fall asleep in each other's arms as they had done thousands of nights before. And tomorrow they would wake and do it all again, tending the ranch, caring for family, living the simple but profound life they had built together. "I love you, Rebecca Lawson," Jacob said, as he had said thousands of times before, and would say thousands of times more than words can express. "I love you, Jacob Lawson," Rebecca replied, the words as true and powerful now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "With everything I am and everything I have, you are my heart." They kissed under the Arizona stars, 2 people who had found each other across impossible distances, and built a love that would endure for all their remaining days. The frightened mail-order bride and the lonely cowboy had become partners, lovers, best friends, and the foundation of a family that would carry their legacy forward into the future. And it had all started with a simple promise, spoken on a dusty street in Old Tucson in 1878. "I will never hurt you." It was a promise that had changed both their lives, a promise that had made everything else possible. And it was a promise that Jacob Lawson had kept faithfully for 37 years and would keep until his last breath. That was the greatest love story of all, not the dramatic gestures or passionate declarations, but the quiet, everyday choice to honor a promise, to treat a partner with respect and kindness, to build something lasting together through patience and mutual support. It was a love story written in shared sunsets and morning coffee, in children raised and grandchildren cherished, in land worked together and a home built side by side. It was the kind of love that lasted not just through the easy times, but through hardship and loss, challenge and change. It was the kind of love that made 2 separate people into one united whole, stronger together than either could ever be apart. And as Jacob and Rebecca walked inside hand in hand, the desert night settled around their ranch with the comfortable familiarity of home. The cattle lowed softly in the distance. The creek burbled over its stones. Somewhere an owl called to its mate. And in the house built by love and labor, two people who had found each other against all odds prepared to rest, secure in the knowledge that they had built something beautiful and lasting, something worth every sacrifice and every struggle. Their love story had begun with fear and flight, with desperation and desperate hope, but it had bloomed into something extraordinary, a partnership of equals, a romance of deep and abiding devotion, a family legacy that would extend for generations. All because a cowboy had understood that true strength lay in gentleness, that real love required patience, and that the most powerful promise a man could make was simply to never cause harm to the one he loved. Rebecca touched the locket at her throat, feeling the inscription engraved there, the promise that had defined their entire marriage. I will never hurt you. It was a promise kept, a love fulfilled, a life completed, and it was more than enough. It was everything.